Hello and welcome to the European Report here in the European Parliament, which is in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we're going to be doing a review, looking at the key major events of 2016 and looking at the challenges facing the EU, Israel and the Middle East in 2017. And my guests include Daniel Schwammenthal, he's the director of the Transatlantic Institute, Tomas Sandell, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, and Lars Adaktusson, a Swedish MEP. So welcome to the programme. I'll first start off with you, Tomas. 2016 has been a good year for ECI, and particularly the historic achievement of getting Yom Kippur recognised by the United Nations as an official holiday has been a major achievement on behalf of ECI. What would you describe as one of the biggest events of 2016? Because we've had quite a few. The Brexit vote, the election of Donald Trump, and of course the wave of Islamist terrorist attacks we've witnessed on this continent over the summer.
Well, thank you, Simon. It's good to be back on the program, and you rightly identified, I think, some of the key events of 2016. And it's obviously difficult to say, well, which is the key news item. I would, if I have to choose relating to Europe and Israel, I would still come back to the terrorist attacks in Europe during this year, and in particular the terrorist attack that hit Brussels. For two reasons. One is that I believe it has become increasingly clear for Europeans that we are facing the same enemy as Israel does. International terrorism, Islamic jihad, doesn't see a distinction between Europe and Israel. I think Jose Maria Aznar once said that, you know, if Israel falls, Europe will also fall. And we saw this very clearly this year. The second reason is, and that's more on a positive note, is the fact that there is an increasing awareness in Europe that this is the case. Europe is not the problem. Europe shares the same values as we do. And not only that, when bad things happen in Europe, the Israelis are the first one to come to our help. And we saw this in a very concrete way this year. Just looking at our international airport here in Brussels, it now reminds us so much about Ben Gurion, simply because these were the security experts that came from Israel to teach the Belgians how you protect your civilians. So I think that the terrorist attack for me would be this decisive moment in a way where I still hope that it will turn out for the better.
Excellent. And Lars, warm welcome back to the programme. 2016 has been a very good year for you, particularly the work that you've been doing here in the European Parliament in getting the Parliament to recognise that the terrorist attacks on the Christian communities in Syria and Iraq, also other minority groups, is considered. You've got the Parliament to actually recognise this as genocide, which is an incredible achievement. But what would you say the major event of 2016 is for you in terms of what's happened in the world?
I think I agree pretty much with what Tomas said. I think it's hard to pick just one single event. If I have to, I would say the war in Syria is of course something that have had a huge influence on world politics and also on European politics from different point of views. When it comes to, of course, the incredible suffering, killings going on as we speak, but also when it comes to other aspects of security and policy. I mean, the terrorism, which was mentioned by Tomas, is kind of connected, of course, to the developments in Syria and the Middle East. That it goes also for the huge issue of migration that we deal with on the European level. So it's very much the events going on is very much focused to the events on the ground in Syria. And I would also say that the situation when it comes to these minorities that you mentioned, the genocide going on, is of course also connected to this. So this has been for too many years now, I would say, some kind of turmoil, some kind of event that influenced the global politics and the European politics in a very, very extensive way.
Absolutely. And Daniel, I have to ask you, as an expert in international relations, what has been one of the key events that you've identified that has implications for Europe that's happened this year?
I think Lars and Thomas said it right. I mean, this is sort of a Chinese curse year. You know, we're living in very interesting times. It's hard to pick, but I think those two events, clearly I would absolutely agree. The situation in Aleppo that is now unfolding over the last year on our television screens, and I think, a Syrian who was interviewed about it, with a very dramatic headline. He's not just so much shocked by this brutal war carried out by the Assad regime, Russia and Iran, but the world's silence. This is indeed frightening, and I think the impact this has, I mean, if we look at the basically absence of any real policy by the European Union and also the United States, as we're just not even bystanders. I mean, it has even been, it's not so much even in the headlines even anymore. We completely ignore it at the moment as the worst war crimes are committed since Bosnia and Chechnya, basically. I think this has tremendous repercussions. Obviously, the humanitarian suffering, the impact it has in terms of refugee pressure on Europe, but I think the stain it leaves on the Western world will never be removed again. But I think also everybody's watching this, and everybody is seeing the absence of any reaction, and including the Israelis, who have done actually much more than the Western world in trying to save people. Tens of thousands of people have by now been treated by Israel, war injured, and many more lives have been saved by Israel than by the collective action of the entire European Union. But they're also watching this as they keep hearing, you know, do make, you need to take risks for peace and we will have your back. And Israel is watching now as Aleppo is being bombed, and not only is nothing happening, but the West is embracing one of the main culprits of these terrible war crimes, Iran, in a way that is simply unprecedented. So we will talk about these events in the future as well.
And for me personally, I think being British, the biggest impact was the referendum on the 21st of June, in which the British people voted to leave the European Union, as well as the surprise election of Donald Trump, which could potentially change everything. Lars, the European Union has pretty much been rocked by these two events, particularly the British people wanting to leave the European Union, and Britain is such a large contributor to the European Union. What impact do you think the legacy of Britain leaving the EU have on the rest of this Parliament and also the European institutions?
We have been rocked, as you say, no doubt about it. Even if we know that this could be the outcome of the referendum, I don't think many of us believe that it should be. So definitely this is a situation which is obviously new for us all. We don't need to know how we should handle this, how the exit, what it would look like, and how we should negotiate. On the other hand, the question marks are also quite a few on the British side. How is the political procedure going to look at? Would it be the Parliament or the government who activates the paragraph 50, leaving the Union? So there are a lot of unclarity around this, and that of course creates a lot of uncertainty in the political work in the Union. So this is definitely one of the biggest challenges that we have faced during the last 6 months since the referendum. But we have a long time when this will affect the work and the activity of the European Union. And basically it will try the basic unity within the union between the different countries. And when the unity is questioned, we have a very tough situation to not get a situation when the union as a whole will be weakened. And I fear that we are in a situation now when the whole union, despite the work going on in order to handle the situation, that we will end up with a much weaker policies, when we will end up with a much weaker foreign policies. This has, of course, a huge impact, and of course it will be also very, very problematic, as it looks today at least, when the new U.S. administration is in place. I mean, that will not make the situation easier. So we have great challenges to handle, and both these events, I agree what you described. I agree that this is really testing the stability within the whole union.
And Daniel, as our foreign policy expert, what will the impact of a Donald Trump presidency have on the European Union, its institutions, and also its foreign policy?
Well, that's $1 million question. We don't know yet for sure. Obviously, the administration is not even sworn in. I mean, that's January 20th. But I think we can try to deduce a little bit from the sort of appointments he has made so far. I think these are all extremely qualified people, and particularly I'm focusing on people dealing with national security, General Mattis, General Flynn, and Mr. Pompeo will be running the CIA. Then, you know, for Secretary of State, I think Romney is still, according to most media reports, the most likely lead. So we definitely, he seems to assemble around him a very robust, experienced team. I think some of the questions that were raised during the campaign about commitments to NATO, I think we do not need to worry too much about that, particularly given these appointments. At the same time, I think Donald Trump did express something perhaps in a more robust way than anybody before him, but something that is not new, that many administrations, including the current one, have expressed themselves. The complaint that Europe is simply not living up to its commitment, just the 2% of GDP on defense, which only 3 or 4 other countries other than the United States are actually fulfilling. I believe that if he continues with this sort of pressure, and if this were then finally lead to a situation where European countries did live up to their commitment, I think this would be actually a very big foreign policy success. It would add a lot to NATO's credibility and its deterrence capability, particularly vis-à-vis Russia. But I think beyond that, it's difficult to pinpoint really concrete policies, except for one, and that's Iran. And I think, again, these appointments, these are all people who have been extremely critical of the Iran deal, and generally in their strategic view see Iran as an extremely, extremely dangerous threat to national security. So I believe from that we can deduce that probably the Iran policy of this administration will dramatically change. I'm not sure if they will rip up the deal. I don't think that they will do this. I think what they will do, they will very diligently implement it, something that many critics have said hasn't been done yet so far. I think there will be additional sanctions, also with a Republican majority in House, but one should also not forget there is actually a bipartisan support for tougher action against Iran. So there will be more sanctions for non-nuclear related activity of Iran, its involvement in Syria, its support for terrorism. And I think this will put European policymakers who are on a full, engagement mode with Iran under a lot of pressure, and a lot of European businesses under a lot of pressure, who could then suddenly be caught up in additional sanctions as well. So that's definitely something to watch.
Tomas, 2016 has been a bit of a mixed year for Israel. On the one hand, we know that Bibi Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, is very happy with with Donald Trump winning the US presidential election. But at the same time, Israel's diplomatic representation here in the European Parliament and to the European institutions are also concerned that one of Israel's biggest allies in Europe is no longer going to be part of the European Union. Any comments?
Well, first of all, we had the new ambassador, Ronny Leshnayar, on the program last month, and I think Israel has made a great choice to send such a competent diplomat to Europe at this critical point in time. As for Brexit, obviously it means for us as an organization that we have to deal with Britain almost on a separate track.
Oh, yeah.
And as you know, we were in London just last month to organize events in the House of Lords and have a national conference in London. And it is true that Britain has been traditionally, I would think, would have sent some of the strongest supporters of Israel to this parliament, and we will miss them clearly in the next few years. But I think nevertheless we have to, looking from our perspective, Europe is wider than the European Union, and just last week I was in Riga in Latvia, and we met with a huge contingent of Russian-speaking Christian leaders. So for us, this also includes Russia and the many nations who are still hoping that one day become a member of the European Union. So I wouldn't want to focus entirely on the European Union, although we are sitting here in the studio of the European Parliament. And and I think Daniel and myself, working for NGOs, will just have to adapt and make the best out of it.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, down to about 7 minutes of the programme left, so we need to look at some of the challenges and the threats facing the EU, Israel and the Middle East in the next 7 minutes. So I'll start off with you, Daniel. What do you consider the big foreign policy objectives of the European Union for 2017 regarding the Middle East?
I think clearly the main challenge and the main interest for the European Union is to really control the migration flow. The mood is turning in Europe. We see partly as a result of the unprecedented influx of migrants over the last year. Not just because of this, but certainly that played a big role in giving an additional boost to a number of, some call them populist, but extreme right, some extreme left parties, such as in Spain. And I think this is clearly, in terms of direct impact on Europe, the biggest challenge that Europe, that the European Union will face. And connected to that is, of course, countering international terrorism. We have homegrown terrorists, but with clear links to ISIS and other organizations. And of course, there's a link to the migration flows, as we know now that several of the terrorists last year came in disguised as refugees, and clearly Russia will remain a big headache for Europe, and I think it will be very important to establish a very credible deterrence posture to prevent Russia from more aggressive steps in the future.
And Tomas, 2017 looks to be a very significant year for Israel. I mean, the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, the 50th anniversary of the unification of Jerusalem and the Six-Day War, and also the 70th anniversary of the UN Partition Plan. And I could go on further, but 2017 looks to be a very significant year. What do you think some of the challenges facing Israel and the European Union are?
Well, I would turn around the question a little bit and say, well, what do I see in the crystal ball? And I would not be completely surprised if President-elect Trump will do what he has promised, but also so many other presidents before him has promised to do, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. And I think if he does, and perhaps when he does, I think a number of other countries will follow. We have always said, and this has been our policy, to say that we should, under any circumstances, keep Jerusalem united. A united Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty is the best protection for human rights, for religious freedom, for people of any faith or creed. So when he does, I will be supporting him.
And you heard it first here on the European Report.
And you heard it first here on the European Report, yes. Last point, what I would like to say, as it comes to Europe, we realize we are facing a major crisis. I think this is a crisis also of values. Most people like to define the European Union today as a union of values, and we have to ask ourselves, what are these values that will sustain us throughout this crisis, that will give us a guiding light? And we all know that Europe didn't just dimp down as a letter in a post box. It's something that actually came from the Middle East, came through Abraham, came through the Jewish people, and is today what we call Judeo-Christian values, or what the UN would call universal values. So I think the only way for us as Europeans to come out of this crisis stronger is really to go back to these values and ask ourselves existential questions. What does it mean today for us?
Absolutely, definitely. And Lars, in your opinion, what are the key issues that you'll be working on in 2017?
I think Daniel basically pointed out the issues very well, and also Tomas. I might add one thing, and that is we need to take responsibility and focus on the situation in Iraq post-Mosul. In order to prevent further sectarian violence, in order to make it possible for these indigenous peoples to return to their ancient homelands. We have passed a resolution in the Parliament where we saying that we have a responsibility to assist in this process. We have a responsibility to facilitate talks between these different groups, and I think it's really important that the European Union live up to these promises and to these obligations, in order to have these groups make it possible for them to return. Otherwise, we will break up the traditional mosaic of pluralism, and I mean, this is a historical situation for Christians, for instance, in these areas, Nineveh Plains. Will they be able to stay or not? And I think for the sake of the whole region, for the sake of the stability in the Middle East, it's really essential that we provide the possibilities for these groups to stay. So this is also a very important issue that we have to face during 2017.
Absolutely. And Lars, do you think there's any possibility, for example, we're now seeing hopefully the dying days of ISIS in both Syria and Iraq, particularly in Iraq, particularly with the help of the Iraqi army and allied air forces. Now, if we capture many ISIS leaders, is there any possibility that they could be tried for war crimes and genocide in the International Court in The Hague?
Definitely, there is a chance. If it will be within the framework of ICC or in some kind of international independent court, I don't know. But I mean, there are so much evidence collected, so much. There are so many witnesses and so much documentation going on. So when the political will is in place, I'm sure that it would be, from a judicial point of view, possible to start this very, very important judicial process. So I mean, this is really a very important issue in order to help people to forget and to have confirmed that they have been victims of the most heinous crime that we know according to international law, which is genocide. So do really hope that we can work with different organizations, work with the stakeholders of the region in order to have these people prosecuted.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the European Report, and I wish you all a happy Christmas and a good New Year, and also maybe happy Hanukkah as well. So I just want to thank you all for watching today's European Report. The challenges facing the European Union, its institutions, the European Parliament in 2017 look very daunting indeed. That's why we got to pray for our political representatives that they may have wisdom. On behalf of everyone in the European Report, we just want to wish you all a very happy Christmas and New Year, and see you here in January 2017.